I've felt pretty confident so far about the main subdivisions that I've made in this, and I've been following pretty closely in trying to identify the structure and the parts of Matthew. The work of Ritterbo's commentary on Matthew, and I think it's out of print now, but it's a really good one. And also the work of Ned Stonehouse, and I'm not sure whether his work is in print now or not. But this man died at an early age, and I haven't mentioned him before, so let me say something about him in case y'all get a chance to come across some of his work. He died at an early age, and the more I've read his books, the more I've really regretted that, because he's just one of the best at the analysis of Scripture. Did a lot of study on the Gospels, and he wrote books in which he's dealing with the witness of Matthew to the Christ, and the witness of Mark to the Christ, and the witness of Luke to Christ. He died, I guess, before he got to John, but I think he probably had in mind doing that too. And what he does is to show what is distinctive about these Gospels, and there's some things that are very helpful in helping us to understand the differences between the Gospels in his work. So I recommend those if you get a chance. They're the kind of book that you have to read more than once, but it is really worth the effort. When we come to this section, chapter 16, verse 13, I'm on a little less confident ground. Stonehouse doesn't do much in the way of analyzing the last part of Matthew and outlining it, and Ritterbo's has an outline that I haven't seen whether I can agree with it yet or not. But I've been able to analyze some shorter sections, and I think that we can call this section from chapter 16-13 through chapter 20 the preparation of the disciples for the death of the Christ or the Messiah. And we're going to see very clearly how that this becomes a new beginning at this point, in which this is clearly the thing that he is doing in trying to get them to understand that what they're dealing with in him is a suffering, dying, rising from the dead Messiah, and not some almighty worldly ruler in a material sense. Mark chapter 16 verse 21 marks a new beginning. Now remember that from 9:35 through chapter 16 verse 12 we've been dealing with the second portion of Matthew's account of the Galilean ministry. In the first part of it, which runs from 4:35 through chapter 9:34, he summarized what the ministry of Jesus was like: preaching, teaching, miracle working, and then gave samples of that, samples of the teaching in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, samples of the miracles in chapters 8 and 9. And then in the rest of that, which deals with this Galilean ministry of Jesus, taking us now through 16:12, he has taken us into a more advanced stage of the ministry, and the issues have begun to be worked out. It has become clear that the Jews are not going to accept Jesus as the Messiah, and this rift between him and the Jewish establishment, the Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees, that this is a gulf that has gotten wider and wider and wider, and it's just a break that has been made. And we saw that very clearly in the last study that we did. The last thing we have in this Galilean ministry, in the first 12 verses, is a warning. Be careful about the leaven of the Pharisees. He warns his disciples. He wants to keep them away from them. And I don't know whether we can understand how much work and how much emphasis would need to be given to that, because these were people that were this was the establishment. And they would think if anybody knew anything, they would. But they didn't. They're blind guides, and you better watch out, you'll fall in the ditch with them, he tells them. And he warns them about the leaven, which is explained as being the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees in the first, from verse 5 through verse 12. And that ends then the public ministry of Jesus, the Galilean ministry, which is where he spent most of his time. So Matthew 16:21 marks a new beginning. From that time began Jesus to show unto his disciples that he must go into Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, be killed, and the third day be raised up. The previous paragraph, from 13 through 20, I'm calling a transition passage. I believe that's a good way to describe what you've got in this, because he takes them up to the northernmost part of Palestine that he ever went, to Caesarea Philippi, this city that was named after Caesar but built by Herod Philip, and so it was Caesarea Philippi to distinguish it from another Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast of Palestine. But that's the northernmost point that Jesus reached, so far as the record goes. He's not up there to preach. He's taken his disciples up there. It's kind of a withdrawal, a retirement. And the rest of his work from here on is not going to have the emphasis on going into synagogues and preaching to crowds and things of that kind, but on training his disciples and preparing them for what's about to happen. Now, we're barely through the halfway mark of the gospel so far as space is concerned, but we are getting close to the end. The last half of the book is going to deal with relatively a little amount of time, and that's the way it is with every one of the gospels. John chapter 12 is the end of the public ministry in John. The rest of it's going to be the last week of his life, which shows us that we're dealing with that the death and the resurrection are central, and that we're dealing with the good news. It's not a biography. It's not the way anybody would write a biography, but it's the good news about Christ. These are gospels. So this is a transition passage. It looks both ways. It looks to the past. These questions, who do men say that I am, and who do you say that I am, this sort of summarizes where they are at this point. See, he does this in order to take the next step. And so it faces back. It summarizes what's happened to now. And it faces future as well, because he says, on this rock I'll build my church. And so future. But he's got to get them to understand the nature of his kingdom, the nature of his messiahship, and that's what the rest of this time that he spends up to his death is going to be all about, getting his disciples to understand the nature of the kingdom that he has been proclaiming. Let's read this whole passage. It's familiar to us, but I'm going to present some material, some of which may be new to you in looking at this. And I think it'll be an interesting study. It may be helpful to us to get the whole thing before us. Chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. Now when Jesus came into the parts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, Who do men say that the Son of Man is? And they said, Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He saith unto them, But who say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, or son of Jonah. In the first chapter of John, it calls him the son of John. So these names are usually considered to be related in some way. Blessed art thou, he tells him, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he the disciples that they should tell no man that he was the Christ. Now, I no sooner read through this and then I recall one thing that I meant to put into these notes and I forgot about the binding and the loosing in verse 19. So I'll probably go back to my computer and insert another note and give this stuff to Donna, and she'll make some copies for everybody. next week. He wants first to get before him a summary of what is thought about him. Now, these are not people that are unfriendly to him, but we find out that even the people that are friendly to him and who think well of him, I mean, these are outstanding things to say about anybody. Say he's John the Baptist, he's Elijah, he's one of the prophets. These are outstanding things to say about him, but they don't understand. They don't understand who he really is. And so that's the thing that comes out, that even the people that think a lot of him have failed to understand, and they've not recognized his messiahship. Some thought he was John the Baptist. Where'd that come from?
From when Herod was afraid that when he found Jesus coming to them, and then after he had beheaded John the Baptist, he was afraid that John the Baptist's ghost had come back to haunt him.
Yeah, he's risen from the dead. And that was the explanation he gave of the miracles of Jesus. So that goes back to chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. So it's probably under the influence of Herod Antipas that some said he's John the Baptist. I don't know whether very many fell for that or not. Some, Elijah. Well, Malachi had said that before the terrible day of the Lord comes, I'll send Elijah to you, in Malachi chapter 4 and verse 5. And we know that the scribes, the experts on the law, they were looking for a fulfillment of that. In the 17th chapter, verse 10, we're going to have Peter, I think it is, well, his disciples, they asked him in verse 10, why then say the scribes that Elijah must first come? So he has to explain something again that he had already explained, that was really referring to John the Baptist. But the scribes, the experts on the law, they said Elijah must come. And in John 1:21, when they sent out to John the Baptist, he started his work, and the establishment, as I've called them, sends from Jerusalem, and they want to know, well, who are you? And one of the questions they ask him is, are you Elijah? Well, he says no. He was not, in the sense that they asked the question, but in another sense, he was. So some thought that Jesus was this, not the Messiah, but a forerunner who would come in advance, Elijah. And others, that he was Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Now there's some interesting background things on this point too. This is another view of him that would involve the resurrection from the dead of an ancient prophet. In the Maccabees, in 2 Maccabees chapter 15 verses 12 to 16, Judas Maccabees, who led Israel in these wars for independence in the period between the covenant, he told the story of seeing a vision of Jeremiah before a battle that he was about to fight. And Jeremiah, who had prayed for the people when he was in his ministry, he prayed for the people now and for Jerusalem. And in the vision, he presents Judas Maccabees with a golden sword that he's to use in striking the enemy. So you see the kind of expectations that there's another passage in 2nd Esdras, which is another one of those apocrypha books that tell about between the covenant. There's a promise from God in 2nd Esdras chapter 2 verse 18, a promise to send Isaiah and Jeremiah to help the people. This is a long time after these have long been dead, but you see the sort of mysticism, or whatever, however you may explain these attitudes that they have. But they expected that maybe some of these ancient prophets be raised from the dead and come to help the people. And so evidently there were people who thought that God might send Jeremiah, or one of the ancient prophets, again, and that this may be the explanation of Jesus. So they didn't know. So he puts that before them in order to put in contrast this question, but who say ye that I am? Ye, the disciples, the 12, in contrast to men generally. And so Jesus evidently wants to get this solid commitment from them before going to the next step. He's going to tell them some things about the future, but first, what has he got to build on here? See, that's the question that's being raised. He wanted to hear the conclusion that they had drawn, and so Peter speaks for the rest. I think one of the important things about this passage is that he does not ask Peter, what do you think? He says, who say ye? Ye is plural, that I am. And Peter answers for all of them when he says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. John 1:41 explains the word Messiah, which is the Old Testament word, anointed one, as being interpreted of the Christ. So what this is talking about is the Messiah. He's recognized him as the Messiah of Old Testament expectation, and he goes further than that. He calls him the Son of the living God. Now I think that there's no use debating the sense in which he meant that when you consider that this gospel has begun by saying that this baby that was going to be born would have the name Emmanuel, which meant what?
God with us.
God with us. And the very idea of a virgin birth, that he was born without a human father, that God was his father. Now that in itself indicates deity. So not Son of God in some lesser sense, but in conformity with the whole idea of this gospel as a whole, one born of a virgin, deity. So Peter has recognized that much about him. Now, that's not the first time they've made similar confessions. I think I'm going to have to refer to one or two of these a little later, so we won't turn to these. But in the 14th chapter, in verse 33, there, when he stills this storm on the water for the second time, they exclaim, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. So they've already called him that, even in Matthew. And Peter, in John chapter 6, verse 66 through 69, when after the teaching of Jesus, most all the disciples just abandoned Jesus. They walked no more with him. There were so many of them that he turns to the 12 and say, you going away too? Looks like maybe just wholesale abandonment. And so Peter says, to whom shall we go? Thou hath the words of eternal life. And you have that, Adam? What's the rest of that? Chapter 6, verse 66 to 69. John's what I'm looking for here. Let's see, I can pick it up from where I left off there. Verse 68, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life, and we have believed and know that thou art the Holy One of God. So, this was not too long ago. This comes after the feeding of the 5,000. I forget what chapter that was in Matthew, but it hadn't been too long that this has taken place, and the Galileans that were following him, they just abandoned him. And Peter makes this confession. Now, it's not in the exact words of Matthew 16, but it has the same meaning. We know that you are the Holy One of God. That's just another way of saying the Messiah. So he'd already made this confession before, but Jesus wants to get this, a formal solicitation of it. And he wants to get this from them again. And so Peter has had a declaration to make concerning Jesus, and now Jesus has this declaration to make about Peter. And in verse 17 he is pronounced blessed. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. I don't know whether a contrast is intended there or not. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are Simon, son of Jonah. Blessed art thou. Now the reason for the blessedness is And it's the Greek conjunction meaning because here. Because flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father who is in heaven. If we turn to all these passages, we're going to take too much time getting over this passage. But a couple of things, maybe it is important to turn to these. And I don't even have, I'm missing the first 11 verse chapters. Chapter 11, 25 to 27. There is where it says, no one knows the Son save the Father. This something can't be known. He can't be recognized through human sources of knowledge. And so he says that you have a blessing, Peter. This has been revealed to you. My Father who is in heaven. And then the other passage in 13, 16, and 17, in the midst of this explanation of why he was using parables, he was saying it was to conceal it, basically, to conceal the truth, the secrets of the kingdom from those who would misuse it and who were not prepared to understand it. They've closed their eyes, they've hardened their hearts, and so on. And but in verses 16 and 17 he says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see the things which ye see, and saw them not, and to hear the things which ye hear, and heard them not. So he'd already pronounced them blessed because of this, the things that they were seeing. And so now here, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, because this is something that is, this is knowledge that has been communicated to you by revelation of my Father. I'm not so sure that means, though, that it was a special revelation, maybe in that instant, that told him who he was. This is what's been happening all through the personal ministry. They'd already before recognized him as the Son of God, and in other ways he'd been declared in that way. God was revealing him in his words, teaching. People heard that, and they were astonished at the authority with which he spoke, and by his works. And when they saw the miracles, that amazed them even more. So God was communicating something of who Jesus was in all of those ways. And in my judgment, that this probably just summarizes that, rather than being some special revelation on the spot that Peter has received. But now he says that he's got a further declaration to make. And this is the thing that I've been working on. And I also say unto thee that thou art Peter, which means a rock, Petros, a rock, a stone. And upon this rock, Petra is the Greek word, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I've been dissatisfied with what we've been saying about this in answer to the Catholics for a long time. It bothers me when we hold on to arguments that the best scholarship of the world has long since given up. And that's just the plain fact about this distinction between Petros and Petra. See, we've generally made the argument that he can't be saying that he would build the church on Peter, because that's a different word. It's Petros. And he says, on this Petra, I will build my church. And so we say that those words are so distinct that it couldn't be Peter here. Well, I think we may have taken the easy way out on that. And I've just been dissatisfied with that for a long time. The thing that has bothered me for a long time is that we never explain why he said what he does to Peter. Why did he say, thou art Peter? Why does he call attention to this name, which means a rock? We just don't seem to have any explanation of that. And so it's almost as if he says that, which becomes a thing that has no significance to it. But now he's going to say the thing that's really important, and he's talking about a rock that's something else. Almost all of the best scholarship, the scholarly commentaries and the dictionaries and those that have researched these words and all this and are capable of doing that, no matter whether it's Catholic or Protestant or what it is, they think that when he says, "On this rock I'll build my church," that he's just talking about Peter. One of the things that needs to be pointed out about this is that it's not going to make any difference to the sum total of biblical teaching, because there is a sense, there's a sense in which the church is built on Christ. You can cite 1 Corinthians 3:11, "Other foundation can no man lay than that which is laid, which is Christ." But you can also cite at least two passages where the church is said to be built on the apostles. One of them is, where do I have that? One of them is Ephesians 2:19 through 22, where it speaks of the church as being a temple, habitation of God in the Spirit, and says, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone. And notice there that Christ is not the foundation as such, but the cornerstone. And the foundation is said to be the apostles and prophets. Well, that could mean, if all you had was that phrase, that could mean the foundation they laid. But it's just different imagery here. And when he calls Christ the cornerstone, that's not a cornerstone he laid, but himself. And it seems to me that in that context, that the more likely explanation is that he is referring to the apostles and prophets as being the foundation themselves. Now, of course, it does have to do with their teaching and their being the revealers of the truth, foundation in that sense. The other passage is Revelation 21 and 14, where the walls of this city, this holy city, New Jerusalem, has 12 foundations. The names that are on those foundations are the names of the 12 apostles. So no matter what this passage is teaching, I mean, what we need to do is work on the context of this passage and just see what it's saying without any fear of introducing anything that's going to be against overall New Testament teaching, because we've got the idea in other passages that the apostles, in some sense, the apostles and prophets are the foundation of the church. Let me make my arguments. Get this thing on tape. If you have a particular thing you want to come back to, what about just jotting down a note, and we'll come back to it when we're done with this tape thing. "Thou art Peter," he says. "Thou art Petros," a rock or a stone. Now, this is not the first giving to him of this name, and this was a name that Jesus gave to him, but this was not the first giving of it to him. His name was Simon. That must have been the name his parents gave him. And but when Jesus sees him at the very beginning, he met him there at the baptism of John. In John chapter 1, verse 4-2, he says, "Thou art Simon, the son of John. Thou shalt be called Cephas," which is by interpretation Peter. Cephas is Hebrew or Aramaic, I guess. And Peter is the Greek equivalent of that. And it means a rock or a stone. Now, Jesus calls him that first time he ever sees him. So the point of that is that from that early stage, he anticipated what this man was gonna be. what he was going to be. And now I think we see why Jesus changed his name, or gave him this additional name of a rock. Some say Rocky. I don't know whether that really represents it or not. He had anticipated what Peter would be, and now the anticipation of what he was going to be has been realized. When Peter steps forward and speaks for the rest and expresses the understanding about who Jesus is, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus evidently had anticipated that Peter was going to be a man of such rock-like faith as this. Now, it may be helpful to refer back to that previous confession that Peter had made in John 6:66 through 69. We read that before. Jesus had done his teaching, and basically people, after the feeding of 5,000, they were ready. They were saying, he's the prophet come into the world. They were ready to take him by force and make him a king right here, right now. The Passover was going on in Jerusalem. They evidently intended to just take him and have him proclaimed king right there while the people were gathered. But he teaches them. And in the course of teaching them about the bread of life, and he goes on to talk about his flesh, not just eating him as the bread of life, but eating his flesh, drinking his blood, and he talks about his flesh and his blood which he would give for the life of the world. He's really talking about his death there. And so this was the thing, this idea of a crucified Messiah, this is the thing that they stumble over. And they said, this is a hard saying, who can bear it? And so many of the disciples then abandoned him and walked no more with him. That was a crisis point in the ministry, the Galilean ministry. And so, with everybody else apostatizing, Jesus turns to the 12 and he says, well, will you go away? And then it's when Peter says, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And he says, we have believed and we know that thou art the Holy One of God. So everybody else crumbled. Peter is a rock. This faith that he shows, compared with the others, is rock-like. And so, when so few have recognized Jesus' identity, and so many would-be disciples have fallen away, Peter's faith has held firm. So Jesus is ready to make another declaration with regard to the future. I can see I'm not going to get all this on one side, so we'll just turn the table when I get to the end of this. On this rock I will build my church. I don't think when we read that and we hear that, I don't think we hear what they heard. I don't think we've got the background for understanding what they understood by the ecclesia, my ecclesia. To begin with, this word, ecclesia, is not even a religious word. It's a word in common usage in Greek writings to refer to any kind of a gathering or assembly or a congregation. And we've even got a few passages in the New Testament where the word ecclesia is used when it's not referring to the Church of Christ. Acts chapter 19 verse 32 is talking about a mob. The silversmiths have gathered there in Ephesus to see what they're going to do about this man that's converting everybody from idolatry, and they losing the business since they're making these shrines that are used in the idolatry. So that gathering, it turns into just a disorderly mob, is called an ecclesia. And then in verse 39, when the town clerk dismisses that group, he says that if you've got any other concerns, then it'll have to be settled in the regular assembly. And that's the word ecclesia again. And he's talking about the regular assembly of the citizens of a Greek city-state. You know, that was from that was Greek democracy, the citizens gathering, the ecclesia. It was used in that sense. Now, the thing that is most significant, though, about its usage is that this word occurs 100 or more times in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. And by the way, I probably should have put Septuagint, LXX, those Roman numerals. If you'll in more scholarly works, you'll find that a lot, sometimes in dictionaries. 70, and it refers to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures. Well, this word ecclesia was used 100 or more times in the Septuagint, and it is regularly used for the congregation or the assembly of Israelites, and especially when they're gathered together, like for those solemn meetings that they held, the sacred meetings that they were held. The word ecclesia is applied to them. So anybody who knew anything about the Old Testament, he would be hearing this word from that background. But he says, my ecclesia. There's one place in the New Testament, Acts 7:38, where it talks about the congregation of Israel in the wilderness, and ecclesia is used to refer to that. So it's used there in the sense that it has so many times in the Old Testament. My ecclesia. This is the word that referred to Israel. I believe this has to be understood against the background of what Jesus sees happening in this nation. He's not going to be accepted by Israel. They are going to crucify him. You know, in the early days, 3,000 will be converted, then it'll be 5,000. But that's soon going to be over, so far as any great success among the Jews. And they are going to permanently, so far as New Testament times are concerned, reject the Messiah. And Paul's going into synagogue after synagogue and preaching and being thrown out by Jews that will reject the Messiah. And that's what Jesus sees happening already. This evil and adulterous generation, he had called them. You don't want to listen to anybody, not John the Baptist with his methods and not me with mine. Just the problem's in you. He had told the authorities that you asked for a sign, but that's not the problem. The problem's with you. You can't discern the signs of the times that have been given, so you don't recognize me as the Messiah. So Jesus sees what's happening, and with Israel as a nation going to turn away from him, he says, on this rock I will build my ecclesia, and uses this word, which was in such common use to refer to Israel. I believe he's talking about this new Israel that he's going to build. One of the things I think that we miss in reading the New Testament is that we don't read it with Jewish eyes. Remember the passage in 1 Peter 2:9. And Peter says, you are an elect race, royal priesthood, holy nation, all that. And he uses term after term that had been used to refer to Israel in the Old Testament days, but he applies it to the church. New Israel. I believe it's even significant that he chose 12 apostles. And there had to be 12. When Judas committed suicide, he had to have a replacement. Now nobody else would ever be replaced but they had to have the 12 apostles. Look at chapter 19, verse 28. You see why that's significant. Peter said, "We've left everything. What shall we have?" And Jesus said unto them, "Verily I say unto you, that ye who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." 12 thrones. There were 12 tribes, 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. But it's this new Israel. And he uses this word, ecclesia, that had been applied repeatedly in the Old Testament to the congregation of Israel. And with that nation rejecting him, he says, "On this rock I will build my church." Now, I'm going to have to mostly argue this after we get the tape turned, but in my opinion, the rock is Peter. Peter becomes the rock by confessing him. Most of the people may be falling away, but Peter has this rock-like faith, and he says, "You are Petros, a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." I will build. And he builds this new Israel. But where can he start? See, I think this is what we're dealing with here. Where can he start to build this new Israel? Not with those who don't understand who he is, who think he's John. You're going to start building on those? John the Baptist? Elijah? Jeremiah, one of the prophets? People who were that screwed up in their understanding? Now, Peter declares it. He understands. And this is something he's gotten by revelation from the Father. Christ, the Son of the living God. And so this rock-like man, he becomes the place to start. On this rock, he says, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Now, it seems to me, I'm going to deal with this toward the end of these arguments, the difference between these words, and we'll summarize what can be said about that. But sort of at the conclusion of this, it seems to me if the rock is not Peter here, then you don't have much of an explanation of this singling Peter out and making the play. It's a word play, very clearly. Petros, Petra. No explanation of this word play that he makes. But when he speaks of the rock on which he'll build the church, if he's thinking of Peter, then the flow of thought becomes just transparent. The surname had been given to Peter a long time ago, in the earliest times, in anticipation of what he would be. Jesus saw in him what this man was going to be. And now when he confesses him, he shows it. This is what Jesus had in mind. This is why he gives him this new name. And so now he's not giving him the new name, but he's directing attention to this name he had already been given earlier, as the anticipation back then is realized. And we see now that Jesus had given him this name in anticipation of the faith which Peter has now confessed, though not for the first time. Okay. Thou art Peter, a stone or a rock, and upon this rock, Petra, I will build my church. Now, I think it's important to realize that this controversial statement here about what the rock is, This is not the end of what he says to Peter. And I think verse 19 really explains what's involved in that. You know, it's a metaphor. A rock, a building, foundation, and a building on it. A metaphor, figurative language that's used. And then some other figures that are used in verse 19. But in verse 19, he's going on to show what's involved in what he said about Peter here and about building the church on the rock. And so Jesus' declaration about Peter continues in verse 19, and I doubt if there's anybody who will doubt that verse 19 is saying something special about Peter. I will give unto thee, singular, the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So verse 19 really elaborates this initial declaration about building on the rock, and it seems to me explains it. We'll look at the details of that in a minute. Now, it's true that other passages make Christ the foundation. 1 Corinthians 3:11 does. Or the chief cornerstone, Ephesians 2. But there are two passages that make the apostles the foundation, Ephesians 2:20 and Revelation 21:14, which we've looked at. So we ought not to be alarmed to find Peter as the spokesman for the apostles, answering for everybody when Jesus answers, who say ye, plural, given this position here. Different passages use this metaphor in different ways. That's the thing that I think has to be appreciated. Christ doesn't even have the same position every time. It's a metaphor, and you can use it in different ways depending on the point to be emphasized in a particular time. But in 1 Corinthians 3:11, he calls Christ the foundation, not the cornerstone, but the foundation. In Ephesians 2 and in other places, he'll call him the chief cornerstone. So it's a metaphor that will be used in some different ways, and the context of passages have to be studied in order to see what particular point is being emphasized in any particular case. Now, Peter, I think, is the rock. I really wonder if we hadn't got into the controversy with the Catholics over this, whether we would have come to any other conclusion about it. Maybe I'm not being just, but I think that may be the case. He's the rock by virtue of the revelation that he's received about Christ and the confession of faith that he has expressed here. Jesus found nothing in the opinions of men that he could build on, but he finds a place to start with this man of faith, the rock on which to build. He'll build the church on him, and I don't think you learn that from this passage, but from other passages you do, that it'll be built on him and the other apostles as they second this confession of faith